Here is the thing worth knowing about Corvin, King of Carneth. He was clever in every way a king is measured, and a fool in the single way that mattered most. Given one night to keep the best thing fate had ever set in his hands, he threw it into the dark with both of them, and called it wisdom, everything that came for him after he had earned. The wedding had been beautiful, which only made what followed uglier. Evelyn had not expected beautiful. She had expected a signing, a joining, of two names on a page, the way alliances were always made between a strong house and a struggling one. Velmara was the struggling one. Everyone in the great hall of Carneth knew it, and most of them had spent the feast being gracious about it in the particular way that made sure she felt the smallness of where she came from. She had smiled through all of it. She was good at smiling through things. A girl, raised in a cold northern hold, learned early that a still face gave nothing away, and a woman gave away nothing at all. But then there had been the moment at the altar stone when Corvin took her hand to speak the binding words, and something had moved between them that neither of them had planned for. She felt it go through her like the first breath after cold water, a pull, low and sudden and certain, winding from the place where his skin met hers straight into her chest, and she looked up and saw it hit him at the same instant. His pale gray eyes had gone wide. For one unguarded breath, the careful young king had looked at her as though she were the only real thing in a room full of painted ones. The bond, rare as clean snow in summer, and theirs. She had heard the old wolves of her hold speak of it in low voices, the way they spoke of anything holy and dangerous. A mate bond did not care for treaties or borders or the wishes of the people who signed the papers. It found what was its own, and it woke, and once it woke, the two it had chosen were meant to belong to each other in a way no law and no lord could put asunder. Aveline had never believed she would be one of the lucky few. Girls from failing northern holds were married for their signatures, not their souls. And yet here it was, alive under her ribs, aimed at a man she had known for the length of one feast. For that one breath, Aveline had let herself believe the story might be a kind one after all. She had felt his pulse jump under her fingers where their hands were joined, had watched his throat move as he swallowed, and had thought, with a hope so bright it frightened her, that perhaps this cold arrangement had accidentally handed them both something real. She should have known better. She had been taught better. Everything good in her life had always turned out to be the bait on someone else's hook. The change came after the feast, when the hall had thinned to the ones who mattered and the ones who served them. Corvin had gone to speak with his foster guardian, the man the whole court called Lord Halloran, and treated like the true spine of the realm. Halloran had raised the king from a boy of 9, had held Carneth steady through the hard years after the old king died, and when he set his hand on Corvin's shoulder and drew him aside and spoke low into his ear, every soul in the hall understood that whatever passed between them was the business of the crown. Aveline watched her new husband's face as he listened. She watched the warmth she had seen at the altar drain out of it, slow, like heat leaving a stone after dark. Whatever Halloran was pouring into his ear, it landed the way poison lands, without a sound and without a mark. And by the time the old lord stepped back, with his sorrowful face composed, the young king, who had looked at her like a miracle an hour before, had become someone she did not know. She watched him turn and look at her, and the way he looked at her now was not the way a man looks at his mate. It was the way a man looks at a blade he has just discovered is poisoned. He crossed the hall to her. He did not lower his voice. That was the part she would carry for 5 years. The part that woke her in the black hours long after she had stopped weeping over the rest of it. He did not even do her the mercy of saying it quietly. "There will be no marriage," Corvin said. The hall went still. "The alliance is dissolved," he went on, and his voice was steady and cold and carrying, a king's voice, built to reach the back of a room. "Velmara sent me a bride and a knife in the same wrapping. I will keep neither. You will be gone from Carneth by morning, and you will thank me that gone is all I am asking." She did not understand. That was the truth of it, the thing no one ever believed after. She stood in her wedding silks in a hall full of strangers, and she did not understand a single word he had said, because she had brought no knife, because she had come north with nothing but a signed page and a foolish secret hope. And now the man fate itself had marked as hers was casting her out in front of the whole world, and naming her a traitor for a crime she could not even name. She could have begged. Some part of her, the young part, the part that had felt the bond wake, wanted to fall against him and ask what lie had been poured into his ear and by whom. But her eyes went past him to Halloran, standing quiet at the edge of the light, with his hands folded and his face arranged into sorrow, and she saw what was under the sorrow. She saw that he was pleased, so Aveline did not beg. She lifted her chin, the way her mother had taught her, the way you face a thing you cannot fight, so that at least it does not get your dignity too, as the king wishes, she said. She turned and walked the length of that hall alone, and not one person in Carneth moved to stop her. What Corvin did not know, what Halloran did not know, what Aveline herself would not know for certain until the sickness came upon her 3 weeks later on the cold road home, was that she did not leave Carneth with nothing after all. She left, carrying the one thing the king had wanted most in all the world and had just thrown away with both hands. She left carrying his heir. 5 years is a long time in the life of a kingdom. It is long enough for a strong house to rot from the inside if the rot is patient, and long enough for a struggling one to become something no one dared laugh at anymore. Carneth had spent those years failing. It happened the way such things always happen, which is to say slowly, and then all at once. Grain stores that came up short at the counting. Coin marked for the border watch that arrived as half of what the ledgers promised. Roads left to break apart. Bridges left to sag. A bad harvest met. Not with the full granary a careful realm should have kept, but with empty shelves and a treasury that echoed. The people grumbled, and then the people starved a little, and then the people began to look at their young king and wonder aloud whether the cleverness everyone had praised in him had only ever been Lord Halloran's cleverness wearing a crown. Corvin knew the shape of his trouble, even if he had not yet found its source. He knew that Carnath would not last another winter standing alone. He knew that there was only one realm north of him, rich enough in grain and gold, to hold his kingdom up, and he knew what that realm had become, because the whole world knew. Velmara had risen. The struggling little northern hold that had once sent Carneth a bride out of desperation now sat on full storehouses and deep mines, and a fleet of river barges that carried its wealth to every court that would trade. It had risen so fast and so cleanly that the songs about it had turned strange and admiring. And at the center of every song was the same figure, the young sovereign who had taken a broken realm and made it the richest in the north in half a decade. A woman, the song said. Cold as the mountains she came from and twice as hard to cross. Merchants who had dealt with her came south with the same story, told in the same lowered voice. She never raised her price and never dropped it. She remembered every figure ever quoted to her, and every promise ever broken. She had built her wealth, not by cruelty, which men would have understood and forgiven, but by being right, patiently, and relentlessly right, until the whole North found it easier to owe her than to oppose her. And she had done all of it, the merchant said, without ever once explaining where she had come from or why a woman so young should hold a realm's whole account in her head as though her life had once depended on missing nothing. They did not use her name in Carneth. In Carneth, the whole matter of the northern wedding had been folded away like a shameful thing, never spoken of, and if any of the older servants remembered the bride the king had cast out on his wedding night, they had the sense not to say so where it might be heard. So when the terms came south, when the message reached Corvin that Velmara would indeed hear his plea for grain and coin, and that Velmara's own sovereign envoy would come to Carneth to set the terms in person, he did not let himself think the thought that scratched at the back of his mind. He told himself it could not be. He told himself the world was not so cruel or so neat. The world was exactly that cruel and that neat. She came through the gates of Carneth on a grey morning, with an escort of Velmaran riders at her back, and the frost still on the stones, and Corvin stood on the steps of his own hall, to receive her the way a king receives the hand that holds his kingdom's throat. For one whole and terrible breath, how to be a king. At all, 5 years had not softened Aveline. They had finished her. The girl he had thrown out of this hall had become something with a straight spine and a still face and eyes that moved over him once, evenly the way a merchant looks over goods that have gone down in value since last he saw them. Pa. Whatever she felt at the sight of him, and Corvin would have given a great deal to know what that was. None of it reached her face. King Corvin, she said. Her voice was level and pleasant, and it cut him to the bone precisely because it was neither warm nor cold. It was the voice of a woman greeting a stranger she has no reason to hate, because hating him would require caring, and she had plainly buried the caring so deep that even he, who had once felt the bond wake between them, could catch no scent of it now. He searched for it, though he could not help himself. Some animal part of him reached across the cold air between them for the thread that had blazed to life the last time she stood in this hall, and found nothing, a closed door where a fire had been, and the emptiness of it hollowed him out worse than any word she could have chosen. She had not merely stopped loving him, she had shut the bond so completely that a man could stand an arm's length away and never know it had ever lived. "You will forgive the state of the roads," Corvin heard himself say. "Carneth is not what it was." "No," Aveline agreed, and let the single word sit there in the cold until it had done its work. "It is not." Then she walked past him into the hall that had cast her out, mistress now of everything he had left to lose, and somewhere in the shadowed gallery above, a man with folded hands and a carefully sorrowful face watched her come and understood, 5 years too late, that he had made one mistake he could not fold away. Corvin did not sleep that night, and it had nothing to do with the woman under his roof and everything to do with what she was. He sat at the long table in his private study, with the Velmaran terms spread in front of him, and read them again by a guttering lamp, and each time he read them, the trap in them showed a little plainer. They were not cruel terms. That was the cruelty of them. Any starving king would sign them gladly, and any king who signed them would wake in a year to find that the grain kept coming, and the coin kept flowing, and every road and mill and river crossing that the grain and coin passed through had quietly become Velmara's to hold. She was not offering to save Carneth. She was offering to own it, slowly, so gently that his own council would thank her for it. As she did, he had underestimated her once. He was not fool enough to do it twice. What Corvin could not decide, turning the pages in the dark, was whether the woman who had drawn up these terms had done it as any shrewd sovereign would, or whether she had drawn them up thinking of a certain hall, and a certain knight, and a certain young king who had stood before his whole court, and named her a knife in a wrapping. He did not let himself follow that thought far. It led places he could not afford to go with a kingdom to feed. In the morning, the court gathered, and Corvin learned the shape of the thing he was up against. Aveline sat at the head of the guest side of the table as though she had been born to the chair, and she listened to his counselors make their cases with a patience that gave nothing back. When they pressed, she did not push. When they flattered, she did not warm. When old Lord Halloran himself rose, folding his hands in that way he had, and spoke in his warm and reasonable voice of the long friendship between their realms and the sorrow of past misunderstandings, Aveline turned her still grey eyes on him and let him talk himself all the way to the end of his fine speech, and then she said only, "I was not aware Carneth remembered the friendship. It did not seem to. The last time I stood in this room, the hall went quiet." Halloran's warm expression did not change, but Corvin, who had spent his whole life reading that face, because his whole life had depended on it, saw something move behind it, a flicker, gone at once. But he had seen it, and for the first time in 5 years, a small, cold question opened in the back of the king's mind and would not close. The terms would take days to settle. Aveline made that plain, and made it plain that she was in no hurry, and since she held everything and he held nothing, she would stay in Carneth as his guest until the matter was done. She said the word guest without any particular weight, and somehow that was worse than if she had made a threat of it. There was one more thing that Corvin noticed and could not fit anywhere, and it stayed with him through the long afternoon. Twice, while the council argued, a shadow had crossed the high window over the courtyard, and Aveline had marked it both times. She never turned her head. She simply went still for half a breath, the way a hunting animal goes still, and then returned to the room as though nothing had happened, and no one else at that table saw her do it. Whatever else 5 years had made her, they had made her someone who counted the exits in a room and watched the roofline out of a habit that had cost her something to learn. He had seen it in soldiers who had been ambushed and lived. He wondered who had taught it to the quiet girl he married, and then he remembered that he had thrown her out onto a cold road alone in the dark, and he found he did not want to follow that thought either. That evening, walking the cold gallery alone, because sleep would not have him, Corvin heard voices below, in the muniment room, where the old records were kept, and he stopped in the dark and listened, because a king who does not listen at his own doors does not stay a king for long. It was Halloran's voice, low, and another, he did not know, lower still. She asks for the grain ledgers going back 6 years, Halloran was saying. The counting rolls, the border pay lists, all of it. That is a great deal to ask for grain, said the other voice. It is not grain she is counting, said Halloran. And there was something in his warm voice now that Corvin had never heard in it in 20 years, a thin, cold thread underneath. See that the oldest rolls are not found, and send word north tonight. If the terms are not signed, and the woman gone within the week, we will need the other arrangement ready. Corvin stood very still in the dark of his own gallery and did not breathe, because the man who had raised him, the man he trusted above every soul alive, had just spoken of Carneth's own records as a thing to be hidden, and of Carneth's savior as a thing to be arranged, and a king who hears that in the dark has only 2 choices left to him. He can decide he did not hear it, or he can decide, at long and terrible last, to find out what he married 5 years ago, and what he threw away, and who exactly had put the words in his mouth to do it. Corvin went back to his cold rooms, and did not sleep, and this time it was not the terms that kept him waking. Morning came grey over Carneth, and Corvin sat through his own council meeting like a man watching a play he had seen before and only now understood. He had spent his life in this room, trusting the warm voice at his right hand. Now he sat and listened to Lord Halloran guide the council the way a drover guides cattle, gently, patiently, always toward the gate he had already chosen. And Corvin marked how smoothly it was done, and how long it must have been done, and felt sick. A word of caution dropped here to cool a counselor's boldness, a flattering aside there to swell another's pride, and bind him closer. A worry raised about Velmara's true motives, spoken with such fatherly reluctance that 3 men nodded before they had thought about it. Corvin had watched this performance 1,000 times and called it wisdom. He watched it now and saw a hand arranging pieces on a board, and wondered how many of the men in this room were pieces, and whether he himself had ever been anything else. When the talk turned again to the Velmaran terms, Aveline set her price plainly. I will not sign for a kingdom I have not counted, she said, before Velmara lends Carneth so much as a single barge of grain. I will see your records. The grain ledgers, the counting rolls, and the border pay lists going back 6 full years, I lend against the truth of a realm, King Corvin, not against its hopes. Halloran was ready for her. He was always ready. He folded his hands and let a little regretful smile touch his mouth, and said, in the voice that had soothed 100 hard rooms, that of course the lady understood how delicate a kingdom's private accounts were, how easily figures taken out of their proper hands might be misread by those who wished Karneth ill, and how it might be better for everyone if the honored envoy simply trusted the summaries his own clerks would happily prepare. "No," Corvin said. The whole council turned. He had not raised his voice. He had learned that from the man now staring at him. "Show her everything," the king said. "Every roll, every list, every ledger, back as far as she asks, and further if it pleases her. If Karneth has nothing to hide, we lose nothing by opening the books, and if Karneth does have something to hide." He let the sentence rest and looked mildly at no one in particular and did not finish it. "Give the envoy of Velmara the run of the muniment room, and whatever clerk she requires, that is the king's word." For one instant, before the warm mask slid back down, Corvin watched the man who had raised him look at him as a stranger might. It was the first time in his life he had ever surprised Halloran, and the wrongness of that, the sheer novelty of it, told him more than any ledger could have. It surprised Aveline, too. He saw it, though she hid it well. Her still gray eyes came to rest on him for a breath longer than they had rested on anything since she rode through his gate, and something moved behind them that was not calculation, and then it was gone, and she inclined her head a precise degree and said, "The king is generous," in a tone that made generous sound like a word she did not trust. She brought her own people to the counting. Chief among them was a broad, blunt woman named Tamsin, who wore a steward's chain and a soldier's scars and looked at the men of Karneth as though pricing them for resale, and a lean young Velmaran clerk who never spoke. Tamsin had been with the envoy since the early days in the north. That much was plain from the shorthand between them. The way a glance from Aveline sent the older woman to a shelf without a word passing, and the way Tamsin alone was permitted to speak to her mistress without first being spoken to. Corvin gave her a Karneth guard as well, a serious boy named Jory, who took the duty so gravely it would have been comic in any lighter season, and who plainly did not know whether he had been honored or exiled by being set to mind the woman who held his kingdom's throat. The first request Aveline made was for the oldest rolls, the ones from 5 and 6 years back, the season before the northern wedding. Word came up from the muniment room by mid-afternoon. Those particular rolls could not be found. There had been damp in the lower vault some years ago, the clerks explained, apologetic, and a quantity of the older records had been spoiled and burned, as a matter of course, and it was such a pity, and surely the summaries would serve. They said it in the smooth, sorry, well-rehearsed way of men repeating an answer that had been prepared for them long before the question was ever asked, and Corvin, hearing it, thought of a warm voice in a dark muniment room saying, "See that the oldest rolls are not found," and felt the last of his childhood quietly die. Corvin was in the muniment room when the word came, because he had found that he could not stay away from it. He watched Aveline receive the news. She did not frown, she did not sigh. She simply went still in that particular way of hers, the way that made the room feel colder, and then she set down the roll in her hand and turned to him. "Records do not go missing by accident, King Corvin," she said quietly, so that only he could hear. "They go missing when someone has spent years counting on no one ever asking to see them. Whoever burned those rolls did it long ago and slept soundly every night since, because he was certain the question would never come." She held his eyes. "So let me ask you a question no one in this kingdom seems to have asked," she said. "Your realm was whole when you sent me away. It began to die that very season, and it has been dying ever since. Has it never once kept you awake, Your Grace, to wonder why your kingdom started to rot in the same season you decided your bride was a knife?" And she picked up the next roll and went back to her counting, and left the King of Karneth standing among his own hidden records with the floor tilting slowly under him. She worked the way a surgeon works, and Corvin could not stop watching her do it. He told himself he stayed to guard the records. It was a poor lie, and he knew it. He stayed because in 5 years of ruling, He had never once seen anyone read his kingdom the way this woman read it. And there was something in watching her that he could not have named and did not want to give up. She did not chase the missing rolls. She let them stay missing. Instead, she took the records that remained and laid them against one another the way you might lay torn pieces of a map. And she found the truth, not in what any single page said, but in the places where two pages disagreed. A grain shipment marked, sent in one ledger, and never marked received in another. A sum paid out for road repair on the Northern Line in a year when, she noted dryly, the Northern Line had famously washed out for want of any repair at all. Coin for the border watch drawn in full and delivered in thirds. Again and again, the missing portion never large enough in any single season to raise an alarm, and always vanishing at the same stage in its journey, passing through the same small clutch of offices, answering in the end to the same quiet hand. There, she said, near midnight, tapping a column. And there, and here again. Do you see it? Corvin leaned over the page beside her, close enough that he caught, for the first time in 5 years, the faint warmth of her, and had to make himself attend to the ledger, and not to the way his own pulse had begun to knock at the sound of her voice gone low over the work. I see a great deal of coin that never arrived, he said. You see, theft, she corrected. But theft is a small word for this. A thief takes and runs. This did not run. This was patient. This bled your kingdom, by a measured amount, every single season. For 5 years. Never enough to be caught, always enough to matter. And it was aimed. She turned her head and looked at him. A thief steals to be rich, King Corvin. This was not stealing to be rich. This was stealing to make Karneth weak. Someone wanted your kingdom on its knees, and wanted it slow enough that no one would think to ask who had pushed. Give me the authority, she said, and my clerks will trace every missing coin to the door it stops at. I can have you the name in 3 days. He should have hesitated. A wiser king, a more careful king, would have weighed what it meant to hand the accounts of his realm to the very power circling it. Corvin did not hesitate. He signed the order that gave the envoy of Velmara the freedom of every account in Karneth, and he signed it over the written objection of his own regent, and when he set down the pen he felt as though he had stepped off a high wall and could not yet tell whether he was falling or flying. Why? Aveline asked him. She was watching him with an expression he could not read. You have every reason to think I am the hand around your throat. Why give me the keys to the rest of you? Because you asked my kingdom a question tonight that I have been too much of a coward to ask it myself, Corvin said, and because in 5 years, no one at this table has ever told me a hard truth to my face. You did it before you had counted a single coin. You did it the very hour you rode back through my gate, standing in the hall where I once cast you out, without so much as raising your voice. He stopped. He had not meant to say that last part. Whatever else you are, you do not lie to me. I find I have missed that more than I can say. Something crossed her face then, quick and terrible, there and gone. For half a breath, the cold envoy was not there at all. And in her place was a woman who had just been handed the one thing she had told herself she would never want again and did not know where to put it. Then it closed. The door in her, the one he had felt slam shut on the steps, held. But she took up the next roll without another word, and when her clerk brought a cipher mark he could not read, a small looping sigil pressed in old wax at the foot of a pay list. It was Aveline who took it to the lamp, and it was Aveline who went suddenly and completely still because she knew that mark. She had seen it once before, 5 years ago, on a folded paper pressed into her hand in the dark of the night she left Karneth forever. She did not tell the king what she had seen. She only turned the wax to the light, and felt the old cold night rise up around her again, and understood that the hand that had bled his kingdom and the hand that had driven her out of it were, beyond any doubt now, the same hand. And something in her that she had kept locked for 5 years turned over and woke. Because if the mark was the same, then the lie was the same. And if the lie was the same, then the man across the table from her, the man she had spent 5 years teaching herself to hate, might never have chosen to throw her away at all. She did not let the thought finish. She had built a realm and a life, and a small warm secret in the north, on the certain knowledge that Corvin of Carneth had looked at her and found her worthless, and she was not ready, not here, not tonight, to learn that the ground she had built all of it on might be another man's lie. So she folded the thought away with the practiced speed of a woman who had folded away worse, and reached for the next roll and counted. They rode out 3 days later to see a granary that the summaries swore was full and the ledgers swore was empty, and the road showed Corvin which of the two had been lying. The granary stood empty to the rafters, cobwebbed, its floor unswept for a season, and Aveline walked its length in silence and then said only, "Write it down," to her silent clerk. And the clerk wrote it down. It was the fourth such place in 3 days. Carneth was a kingdom that existed twice, once in its true and hollow self, and once in the fat and comfortable figures that Halloran's clerks had been feeding a young king for years, and the distance between the two was exactly the size of the hand in the dark. It was dusk by the time they turned back, the light going bronze and then gray, and they had reached the narrow cut where the granary road ran down between two banks of old stone when Aveline lifted her head and went still in the saddle. "Riders," she said, "behind and ahead. We are meant to stop in the middle." Corvin heard nothing. Then he did. They came from both banks at once, 6 of them, quick and quiet and rapt against knowing, and they did not shout the way robbers shout. Robbers want your purse and your fear. These wanted only that the road stay quiet, and men who want a thing done quietly are never robbers. What happened next rearranged everything Corvin thought. He knew about the woman he had married. Aveline was off her horse before the first blade reached them, and she did not run and she did not scream. She met the nearest man, low and inside his reach, took the wrist that held the knife, and turned it until he lost the knife and folded to the stones, and she had his own blade in her hand before he had finished falling. The second came at her back, and she was already not there, had already stepped through the space where a slower woman would have died, and she put an elbow into his throat and left him gasping in the dirt. She fought the way she read a ledger, without waste and without mercy, and 3 moves ahead of the men trying to kill her. And Corvin, laying about him with his own blade at her shoulder, understood in the middle of the fight that whatever the song said about the cold merchant queen of Velmara, no merchant had ever learned to move like that. Someone had trained her hard, for years, because her life had needed it. A whistle cut the dusk, 2 short notes, and the men still standing broke off at once, not scattering. Withdrawing, clean and ordered, the way soldiers leave a field on command. Then it was quiet, and the 2 of them stood breathing hard in the ruined light, with the fallen groaning around them, and Corvin was not surprised, and Aveline saw that he was not surprised. "How many times?" she said. It was not quite a question. "This year," said Corvin, "the 4th. She crouched by the man she had put down first, and turned his slack hand palm up, and there, worked into a ring on his smallest finger, was a small looping sigil pressed in silver, the same mark that had sealed the pay list. The same mark that had sealed the paper in the dark 5 years ago. She looked at it a long moment and did not show the king her face. "They did not come for your purse, and they did not come for mine," she said, rising. "They came to keep a road quiet. Men who withdraw on a whistle are not brigands, King Corvin. They are an army, and an army has a paymaster." The nearness of dying had done something to the air between them. Corvin could feel it, the thing under his ribs, that had lain silent for 5 years, straining now toward her across the dusk, and when she turned to face him, he saw the same tightness in her, the same terrible awareness, the closed door shuddering in its frame. For one breath they only looked at each other in the ruined light, close enough to touch. 5 years and one lie, and a kingdom of stolen grain standing between them, and neither of them moving. He caught the warmth of her again, the scent the bond had woken to on their wedding night, and never once forgotten, and he saw her nostrils flare as she caught his. And for that suspended moment the envoy and the king were gone, and there were only two wolves who had been made for each other and torn apart. Then Aveline stepped back and put the space between them, again deliberate, and her face was the envoy's face once more. "We should ride," she said, "before the light goes. Whatever your regent means to arrange. King Corvin, I would rather not be standing still on an empty road when he arranges it." She swung up into the saddle and did not look back to see whether he followed, and Corvin sat his horse a moment longer in the near dark, looking at the empty place where she had been, and knew two things with equal and unwelcome certainty: that someone he loved had been trying to kill him for a year, and that he was against every scrap of sense he had left, falling for his own discarded wife all over again. "If you have come with me this far into Carneth, and I am glad of your company in it, take one breath to follow this channel so the next of these stories can find its way to you. Now come back with me, because the cold is about to break." In the days after the road, something changed in the way Aveline watched the king, and she hated that she could feel it changing. She had come to Carneth able to name exactly what Corvin was. He was the man who had looked at her on the one night that should have been theirs, and decided she was worthless, and she had built 5 years and a whole risen realm on the solid ground of that knowing. It had held her up. A woman can survive almost anything if she is certain of who wronged her, but certainty was a ledger like any other, and hers had stopped balancing, because the man she watched now did not behave like a man who had ever found her worthless. He came to the counting room before she did, and left after he learned the names of her clerks. When Tamsin barked at a Carneth steward, who deserved it, the king hid a smile. He listened to Evelyn the way no one had listened to her since she was a girl, before she learned that being listened to was usually the first move in taking something from you, and the trouble was that Corvin did not seem to be taking. He seemed only to be looking at her as though he could not quite make himself stop. She catalogued the small wrongnesses, the way she catalogued a crooked ledger, because a crooked thing could at least be understood. He remembered that she took her tea without honey, and had it sent that way without being asked. He noticed when she had worked too long and left food where she would find it, and did not stay to be thanked. Once, when the young clerk made an error that would have cost him dearly in most courts, Corvin simply corrected the figure himself and said nothing, and Aveline had watched the boy realize he had been spared, and watched the king make certain no one saw him do the sparing, and had thought, with a flare of something dangerously like grief, that a cruel man does not trouble to be kind where no one is counting. She did not want that thought, she had no shelf to put it on. So she watched him more, hunting for the cruelty she needed him to have, and found only a tired man being careful of her, and it frightened her more than cruelty ever could. They were alone in the muniment room past midnight, both of them too far into the work to remember they were supposed to be enemies when it happened. She had found the office where the stolen coin changed hands, the exact desk in the exact chain where the full sums went in and the short sums came out, and she turned to show him, and he was already close, bent over the same page, and there was nowhere for either of them to go. The lamp was low, the palace was asleep. The bond that had woken on their wedding night, and been denied for half a decade, came up under her ribs so hard she felt her breath catch, and she saw his eyes drop to her mouth and darken. "Aveline," he said. Just her name. He had not said it since she came back. He had called her envoy and lady, and the honored guest of Velmara, and all of it had been armor for both of them, and now the armor was gone, and there was only her name in his mouth. Low and undefended, she should have stepped back. She had made a life out of stepping back at exactly the right moment. She did not step back. He kissed her, or she kissed him, and neither of them could afterward have said which, and for one long reeling moment, the 5 years fell away, and there was only the warmth of him and the door in her chest swinging wide, and the terrible relief of a thing coming home that she had told herself was dead. His hand came up to her jaw as though she might break. She fisted her hand in his collar as though he might flee. The bond flooded across every point where they met, and it was not desire alone, though it was that too, it was recognition. It was her own wolf saying, against all sense and all safety, "There you are, at last, there you are." She had spent 5 years teaching that wolf that the man was dead to them. The wolf had never once believed her, and now, with his heartbeat under her palm, it would not even pretend, which was exactly why she wrenched herself back from him, breathing hard, and put the width of the table between them. Because if the bond was true, and it was, then Corvin had not been able to help feeling it 5 years ago either, and if he had felt it and thrown her away regardless, then he was crueler than she had ever let herself believe. And if he had not thrown her away at all, if something had reached into that hall and torn them apart against both their wills, then she had spent 5 years hating the wrong man and building her whole self on a lie. And she did not know which of those was worse, only that both of them ended with her heart in someone else's hands again. And she had sworn on a cold road long ago that she would die before she let that happen twice. "That cannot happen again," she said, and her voice did not obey her, and they both heard it. Corvin did not argue. He only looked at her across the little lamplit room with his whole ruined heart in his face and said, "I know," in a way that meant the opposite, and let her go. The concord came to Carneth within the week, and the whole board was suddenly on the table at once. They came from every realm that bordered the two kingdoms, the Alpha Lords of the North, and the river country, and the high passes, because a debt this large between two crowns was the business of all of them, and a settlement sworn before the Concord was a settlement no king could later break. Corvin welcomed them with a feast that Carneth could not afford and could not be seen to lack, and Aveline sat at his right hand as the envoy who held his fate, and the great hall that had cast her out 5 years before now rose when she entered it. She should have felt triumph. She had planned, in the cold years, to feel triumph on exactly this night. Instead, she felt Corvin beside her, the warmth of him, the bond straining quietly against the door she had shut on it, and she found the triumph had gone to ash in her mouth. He drew her out of the crush at the height of it, onto a stone terrace above the sleeping gardens where the noise of the feast fell away, and for a while neither of them performed anything at all. "You do not want to be here," she said, studying the side of his face. She had not meant it to come out so gently. He laughed, low and surprised, and without any of the king in it. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I have spent 5 years learning to tell when a person is smiling for the room," she said, "and you have been smiling for the room since the night I met you. It is a very good smile. It fooled me once. It does not fool me now, because I built the same one, and I know from the inside what it costs to wear." The false ease went out of his face, and what was left underneath was younger and far more tired than the crown ever let anyone see. "I have worn this face since I was 9 years old," Corvin said quietly. "Halloran taught it to me the week my father died." "Never let them see the boy," he said. "Give them the king they need and hide everything else so deep no one can use it against you. I have been so far inside it for so long that I stopped being able to find the edge where the face ends, and I begin." He looked at her. "You are the only person alive who has ever looked at me and seen past it. You did it the moment you walked back into this hall, before you had any reason left to be kind to me, and you have done it every day since, and I am so tired. Aveline, I am so tired of being the only true thing I am not allowed to show." And there, on the cold terrace, the bond did the thing she had been dreading since the ambush. It did not merely strain, it opened, all the way, both directions at once, and she felt him. Not his want, which she already knew, his grief, his shame. The bottomless 5-year ache, that was the exact, and terrible twin of her own. It poured into her through the place where the bond joined them, and it was real, and it was his, and it was the one thing she could not argue with or audit or fold away, and it frightened her more than any blade on any road had ever done. She stepped back so fast she struck the balustrade. "It changes nothing," she heard herself say, and watched the words land on him like a slap. "We are a debt and a signature, Your Grace." He went very still. "Of course," he said, and the mask came down over the wound so smoothly that only a woman who had just felt his heart could have known the wound was there at all. "Forgive me. We should go back." They went back into the light and the noise, and a servant met them at the terrace door with a tray, 2 cups of dark wine for the king and his honored guest, and Corvin, hollowed out and not thinking, reached for one. Aveline's wolf came up snarling before her mind had caught the reason. She struck the cup from his hand. It shattered on the stones and the wine ran black between the flags, and she was already down on one knee over it, and the smell that rose from the spill under the sweet of the wine was the smell of the bitter northern root that farmers use to kill wolves too clever for a snare. "Do not touch the other one," she said, low and cold and absolutely certain. "That was not meant for a guest. That was meant for you, and it was meant to look like nothing at all." A king who dies of a stopped heart at his own feast is a tragedy. A king who is found with a knife in him is a murder someone must answer for. Whoever set this cup wanted grief, not questions. The color left Corvin's face. Across the hall, unhurried, a warm and sorrowful old man watched 2 cups become one, and folded his hands, and Aveline marked exactly where he stood, and exactly how little the sight of the spilled wine troubled him, and added it to the ledger in her head that had never yet been wrong. "Say nothing," Corvin breathed. "Aveline the Conquered is under my roof to swear a peace. If it is known that a king was poisoned at his own settlement table, there will be war between 6 realms before the candles burn down, and Carneth will be the field they fight it on. Every man in that hall came armed with a grievance older than either of us. Give them 1 drop of blood tonight, and they will not stop at drops. I am begging you, not tonight. Give me tonight." She looked at him, and she looked at the black wine spreading between the stones, and every instinct she had built said no. "All right," she said. "Tonight?" And then he turned and walked back into the feast, wearing the easy smile of a man without a care, and Aveline watched him go, and could not make her feet be still, and after a slow count, she gathered her skirts and followed him into the dark of the palace to learn at last what her husband had been hiding. She found him where the light did not reach, in the small, cold room off the muniment hall where the sealed evidence was kept, and he had a bundle of old papers in his hand, and when he heard her in the doorway he went as still as a man who has finally run out of places to stand. "Whatever you are about to tell me," Aveline said, "tell me the whole of it. I have had 5 years of half of things. I will not survive another," so he told her. He told her that he had known for a fortnight that the night he overheard Halloran in the gallery, he had begun to pull the thread, quietly, the way she pulled a ledger, and that the thread had led him back and back through 6 years of arranged ruin to a single hand, and then further back still, past the ruin, to the night of their wedding. He told her what Halloran had brought him that night, an hour before the feast ended. A confession, sealed and witnessed, in which a captured Velmarin agent swore that the northern bride had been sent south, not to wed the king at all. There had been details in it, he said, small ones, the kind that make a lie breathe, the name of a handler, a sum of Velmarin gold. A phrase Aveline was supposed to have spoken to a contact on the road south, a phrase she had never spoken to anyone, because it had been invented whole. It had been built to be believed by a frightened boy, and it had done its work in the space of a single whispered minute. Forged, all of it. Corvin knew that now. He had the forger's own hand to prove it. In the papers he was holding, matched line for line against 3 other documents in Halloran's own archive. But I did not know it then, he said, and his voice broke on it. I was 20 years old, and the man who raised me put a sworn confession in my hand and told me the woman I had just felt the bond wake for was sent to murder me. And I believed him because I had never once in my life had a reason not to. And I stood in that hall, and I unmade us in front of everyone, and I told myself it was the price of a crown, and I have not had one whole night's sleep since. Aveline stood in the cold doorway and felt the ground she had stood on for 5 years quietly turn to water. He had not found her worthless. He had been made to believe her a murderer. Some starved part of her wanted to weep with the relief of it, and a colder part, the part that had rebuilt her out of nothing on a mountain in the north, looked past the relief to the thing underneath, and found the thing underneath, and went very quiet. Because relief was a door, and she had walked through a door for this man once before, on an altar stone, with the bonds singing in her blood, and it had cost her everything. She did not trust doors anymore. She had learned to look at what was behind them first. A fortnight, she said. Corvin stopped. You have known for a fortnight, she said, that we were both lied to. That I was innocent. That I spent 5 years believing my own husband looked at me and found me nothing, when the truth was you were poisoned into it by the same hand that has been poisoning everything else. You have known that. And you kissed me, in that counting room, and you bared your grief to me on that terrace, and let me feel it, and in all of it, in every hour of it, you decided I could not be trusted with the one truth that would have given me back 5 years of my life. You did it again, Corvin, the exact thing. You looked at me, and you decided for me what I was allowed to know. I was going to tell you, he said. I swear it. I wanted the proof in my hand first. I wanted to be able to give you the whole of it, and not a fragment. You would be right to doubt I was trying to do it properly this time. Aveline, please. I was afraid that if I told you before I could prove it, you would think it one more clever lie from a man who had already lied you out of your own life once, and you would leave, and I would never. He stopped. I was afraid you would leave, so you lied by silence to keep me from leaving, she said. Do you hear it? Do you hear that it is the same sentence as before? He had no answer, because there was none, because she was right. There was one thing more, and she gave it to him, because they were past mercy now. She reached into the collar of her gown and drew out a folded scrap of paper, worn soft as cloth, by 5 years against her skin, and she set it on the table between them. It was sealed with a small looping sigil in old wax. The mark from the pay list. The mark on the killer's ring. He did not only lie to you, she said, the night you cast me out. This was pressed into my hand at the gate by a man I never saw. It said that if I ever spoke one word against the king, or ever tried to come back, or ever told a living soul what had truly passed in that hall, the proof of my treason would go to every court in the north, and my family and my whole failing hold would be burned out of the world for the crime of sending a murderer to a throne. I was 19 and alone, and I believed it could be done, because I did not yet know how the world worked. So, I said nothing. For 5 years, I said nothing. We were both made silent by the same hand, and we each thought the silence was our own. The room was very quiet. We were children handed the same lie from 2 ends, Aveline said, and her voice was steady now, steady and final in a way that was worse than tears. And I have grieved us long enough. Good night, King Corvin. She turned and walked out of the cold room, and this time, unlike the last time, she was the one with all the power in the world, and it did not help at all. She did not reach her chambers. Halloran was waiting in the passage, warm and grave and sorrowful, the way he was waiting at the edge of every disaster he had ever authored. And Aveline understood before he spoke that the old man had watched her leave the king and had come to gather up the pieces for his own use, the way he gathered up everything. My lady looks unwell, he said gently. I feared as much. It grieves me to be the one to say it, but I think you have seen tonight what our young king truly is. He spread his hands, the poison in his cup. Yes, I know of it already, Such things are always brought to me first. Do you understand what he means to do with it? By morning he will stand before the Concord and swear that Vilmara poisoned him. That your own envoys, that you yourself, carried the northern route into his hall, to murder him and seize his kingdom. For the debt, 6 realms will hear it. And when they turn on Vilmara, as they must, the debt he cannot pay will be swept away in the war, and the wife who shamed him will be swept away with it. He has used you from the hour you arrived, my lady. I am only sorry you had to feel it first. It was very good. Aveline stood in the cold passage and let herself feel, for one moment, how good it was, how neatly it fit the shape of her freshest wound, how easy it would be to let it in. This was the man's whole art. He did not invent your fears. He found the ones you already had, and he watered them. He had done it to a grieving boy of 9 and made a puppet of a king. He had done it to a frightened girl of 19 and made her vanish without a fight. And now he stood in a dark passage and did it to the sovereign of the North, offering her a grief so perfectly cut to her wound that a lesser woman would have wept with the relief of being told at last that her pain had been correct all along. But Aveline had spent 5 years being lied to by experts, most of them in her own head, and she had learned the one thing that undoes a liar like Halloran. She had learned to distrust the story that made her feel most justified. And that was how she caught him, because a lie built out of another person's wounds has a seam in it, and she had spent 5 years learning to read seams. The poison was an hour ago, she said slowly, as if working it out, letting him think he had her. If the king meant to blame Vilmara, he would want witnesses to the poisoning, the whole Concord in the room. Instead, he begged me, privately, to keep it silent through the night. She lifted her eyes to Halloran's, and the working out was gone, and what was left was the cold, clear thing that had built a realm. A man laying a trap does not hide the bait, my lord. He had one witness to that cup in all the world, and instead of using her, he asked her to say nothing. That is not a man framing Vilmara. That is a man protecting a peace. You have told me a great deal about what the king means to do at the Concord tomorrow. I find I am wondering how a loyal regent came to know the king's secret intentions so very exactly when the king does not have them. For the first time in 20 years, the warm, sorrowful face did not have an answer ready. So, here is what will happen, Aveline said, and now she was not a wounded wife at all. She was the sovereign of the richest realm in the north, and she let him see it. Tomorrow, I will stand before the Concord. I will ask them for one small thing, a thing no honest man could refuse. I will ask that the sealed vault beneath the muniment hall be opened before all 6 realms, and its contents read aloud, the paymaster's ledger, the forger's confession, the pay lists sealed with a certain little mark, and the old rolls, my lord, from 5 and 6 years back that a damp vault so conveniently burned. Shall we see whether they burned as thoroughly as you were promised? She had made one error, and it was the error of every honest person facing a cornered liar. She thought the reckoning would wait for morning. Halloran moved faster than an old man should, and the little blade came out of his sleeve, aimed to silence her, before she could call out, because he had spent his whole life making certain the dangerous ones stayed quiet. But Aveline had not learned to move like a merchant. She had learned it on a cold mountain in the years when she was building a realm out of nothing, and a great many men had decided a young woman alone would be easy to remove. She took the wrist as it came, the way she had taken the killer's wrist on the granary road, and she turned it until his fingers opened, and the blade rang on the stones, and she put the old man down against the cold wall, with her forearm across him, and her face close to his. You wondered, all these years, why the little northern bride never once fought back, she said, very quietly. Only for him. You should have wondered harder, my lord. I did not stay silent because you frightened me. I stayed silent because I was building something you could not reach, and now I have reached you. Corvin came around the corner, at a dead run, with half the palace guard behind him, drawn by the ring of the falling blade, and he stopped at the sight of the woman he had wronged, holding the man who had ruined them both, pinned and disarmed, against the wall of his own palace. "The vault," Aveline said, without looking up. "Open it tonight, before the Concord, before he can send word north, before one more roll can burn. Everything you and I have been afraid to know is behind that door, and I am done being afraid of doors." They opened the vault, and in the gray hour before the Concord woke, in the sealed dark that Halloran had trusted for 20 years, they found all of it. The ledger, kept in his own careful hand, every stolen season set down like a merchant proud of his margins. The forged confession, and beside it the drafts of the forgery, the same lie tried 3 ways until it read true. The pay lists, the unburned rolls, which had never been near any damp at all, but had been sealed away against the day someone might think to match them to the summaries. Letters north, to the men who would have moved on Velmara the moment war gave them leave. The whole patient architecture of a man who had raised a boy into a puppet, and bled a kingdom into a tool, and thrown a true bond into the dark, to keep 2 realms from ever standing strong together, because 2 strong realms bound by a living bond could never be ruled from behind a warm and sorrowful smile. It was enough. It was more than enough. There was not a lord in 6 realms who could look at it and doubt. By the time the sun was up, the Conquered had heard the whole of it read aloud, and Carneth had its truth, and its traitor was taken down to the deepest cell under the citadel to wait on the judgment of 6 kings. And the woman who had returned to own the king's future had, instead, handed him back his own kingdom. You would think that would be the end of it. The truth was out. The lie was named. The hand that had torn them apart was chained in the dark under the citadel, and every realm in the north knew now that the cold envoy of Velmara had never been a murderer at all, but a girl handed a cruelty she did not earn and remade into a queen in spite of it. But a wound that has fed you for 5 years does not close, because someone shows you the knife. Aveline signed the settlement. She signed it fair, fairer than Carneth had any right to, because she was not, whatever the song said, a woman who punished a whole people for one old man's sin. The grain would come, the coin would come, Carneth would live. And then she gave orders for her people to make ready to ride north, because her work was done, and there was nothing left in this kingdom for her but a hall full of the worst memory of her life, and a man she could not afford to forgive. Corvin did not beg. She had braced for begging, and could have armored herself against it. What he did was worse. He began, quietly, to give her back her name. He struck the word traitor from the rolls of Carneth with his own hand, and had the truth of that night read in every square of the capital, so that the whole kingdom that had watched him cast her out now learned exactly who had lied and who had been wronged. He did not do it where she could see. She heard of it from Tamsin, who heard of it from Jory, who had wept telling it. He sent a rider north to her family's small failing hold, the one Halloran had once threatened to burn out of the world, carrying a writ under the king's own seal, restoring its standing and its lands and naming its daughter, in the formal language of the court, blameless and beloved of Carneth. He commissioned no statue and made no speech. He simply spent the days before her departure, setting right, one careful stone at a time, the reputation he had shattered in a single sentence 5 years before, and asking nothing in return. Twice he found reason to be where she was, and both times she braced for the ask, and both times it did not come. Once he only handed her a ledger she had mislaid, and let his fingers not quite touch hers and left. Once he stood in a doorway and said, "Young Jory tells me you ride at week's end. I will see the roads cleared and an honor guard ready. Whatever you need for the journey, it is yours." And then, when she waited for the rest of it, the plea, the leverage, the reminder of the bond, he only inclined his head and went, and left her standing with her guard up against nothing at all. That was how she knew the boy who had wronged her had finally become a man, and that was the cruelest thing he could possibly have done, because it made leaving him feel like a wound she was choosing. On the last night, she went to find him to say a cold goodbye, and she found him in the empty hall, alone, at the altar stone where they had almost been married, and he did not know she was there. He was talking, quietly, to no one, the way a man talks when he has carried a thing too long, and there is finally no one left to perform. For, I had one night, he was saying to the empty dark, one night with the best thing that ever came to me, and I threw it away on another man's word, and I have spent 5 years learning exactly what I threw. She built a kingdom. She raised herself out of what I did to her and turned it into something magnificent, and she did it without me. And she was right to. And now she is going home, and I am going to let her, because the one thing I have learned in all of this is that I do not get to decide what she is allowed to have. Not anymore, not ever again, his voice cracked. I only wish I had one more night to do it right, one more chance to stand in this hall and say the true thing instead of the lie. I would not waste it this time. I know exactly what I would say, and I will never get to say it, and that is a fair price. That is the fairest price I have ever been asked to pay. He bowed his head in the dark of the empty hall, the king of Carneth, alone at the stone where he had unmade the best thing in his life, mourning a woman who was standing 10 paces behind him in the shadow of the door, hearing every word. And Aveline, with her cold goodbye dying in her mouth, heard the man confess to an empty room the very thing she had crossed 5 years and a whole kingdom, refusing to let herself believe. She stepped into the light. Then say it, she said. He turned, and his whole ruined face broke open at the sight of her, and for a moment he could not speak at all. Then he came down from the altar stone, and he did not reach for her, did not use his height or his crown or the bond or any of the 1,000 advantages a lesser man would have grasped at. He stood in front of the woman who held his kingdom and his heart and every card there was, defenseless, and he laid it all down. 5 years ago, I stood in this hall, Corvin said, and I unmade us in front of the whole world. And I told you that gone was all I was asking, and I have never been more wrong about anything in my life. I have no kingdom to offer you. You already own it. I have no leverage, no bargain, no clever thing to trade. I am not a king right now. I am only the fool who threw you away, asking the woman he wronged for something he has no right to ask. He took a breath, like a man stepping off a wall. Stay, not as an envoy, not as a debt. Stay married to me, and let me spend the rest of my life proving I know what I nearly lost. I dare you. The old dare. The one she might have thrown at him herself, on some braver night in another life. And Aveline, who had every reason to turn and ride north and never look back, discovered that she had come to the end of the hate that had held her up, and that under it, where she had been afraid to look for 5 years, the bond was still there, and still true, and still hers. It had survived his lie, and her silence, and 5 years of frost. It had survived being denied on the one night it woke. Standing in the hall, where it had first come alive, she understood that it was the single thing she had ever been given, that had never asked her for anything at all, and that she had been treating the truest thing she owned like the cruelest, because it had arrived on the worst night of her life, and she had never learned to tell them apart. But she did not say yes, not yet. There was one truth left in the world that only she held, and she would not build anything new on a hidden thing, because she had lived what hidden things did. Ask me again, she said, when there is nothing left, forcing either of our hands, when the debt is paid and the settlement is old, and you have had time to know your own heart with no kingdom hanging on it. Ask me then, Corvin, and I may answer differently than you fear. She paused at the threshold of it, at the edge of the last and largest thing, and her steady voice was not quite steady now. But before you ask me anything, there is something you have to know. Something I took north with me the night you sent me away. Something I have kept from you, exactly as long as you kept the truth from me, and for exactly the same reason, and I am done with reasons. I will not stand here and ask you to trust me. and hold the biggest thing of all behind my back. I have seen where that road ends. We both have. Corvin went still. You have a son, Aveline said. He is 4 years old. He has your eyes, and my temper, and his name is Win, and he is the reason I did not lie down and die on that road. And he is waiting for me in the north. I did not keep him from you, to punish you. I kept him because for 5 years I believed you had thrown us both away on purpose, and I would have burned the world down before I handed such a man my child. I was wrong about the reason. I was not wrong to guard him. Her chin came up. The old gesture. The one from the night he cast her out. You threw away more than you knew that night, Your Grace. Now you know all of it. He did not rage and he did not weep, though both were in his face at war. He sat down slowly on the steps of the altar stone, as though his legs had stopped agreeing to hold a king, and he said the boy's name once, quietly, the way you say a word in a language you are only just learning, that you have always known. Win, he said, tell me everything. Tell me all 4 years of it. I have missed all of them and I want everyone. So she sat down beside him on the cold steps, the sovereign of the north and the king of Carneth, and she told him. She told him of the sickness on the road and the hold in the mountains and the first thin cry in the dark. She told him that the boy ran before he walked, and argued before he could properly speak, and had, heaven help them both, already learned to go still and count the exits in a room because his mother had taught him without meaning to. She told him that Win asked about his father exactly once a year, on his birthday, and that she had never known what to say, and had said only that he had been far away, which had not felt like a lie until tonight. And Corvin listened the way he had listened to her over the ledgers, as though there were nothing else in the world, and at some point in the telling his hand found hers on the cold stone, and she let it stay. He did not ask her again that night. He kept his word, which she was learning he did now, and it undid her more than pressing ever could have. He sent her north with her honor guard and her signed peace, and a letter for the boy he had never met, and he did not follow, because following would have been a kind of forcing, and he had promised there would be no more of that. He asked her when the settlement was old. He came north, without an army and without a crown, a king walking into the hall of the realm that held his kingdom's debt, and he knelt in the mud of a mountain yard to meet a 4-year-old who looked at him with his own gray eyes and asked, with terrible directness, whether he was the father who had been away, and did not trust himself to say more, and the boy considered this, and then showed him a frog he had been keeping in a jar, which is how the king of Carneth understood he had been forgiven by the only member of the family who had never learned to hold a grudge. He asked her over a whole slow year, in daylight, with nothing forcing either of their hands. He courted her the way he should have been allowed to the first time, badly and honestly, learning her all over again, and learning the son he had missed, and never once reaching for the bond to do the work that words should do. And one ordinary morning in the north, with the frost on the window and wind shouting in the yard, Aveline looked at the man across her breakfast table, worn honest and patient and finally whole, and she found that the wound that had held her up for 5 years had quietly finished closing while she was not watching, and she said yes. They were married in the hall at Carneth, where he had once cast her out, and this time the whole world rose for her, on purpose. The same lords who had watched him name her a knife 5 years before, now watched him take her hand and mean it, and the concord that had heard the truth read aloud stood witness so that no living soul could ever again unmake what was made that day. He wept during the vows. She had known he would. She managed not to, right up until he reached the words he had failed to say 5 years before, the true thing he had rehearsed to an empty hall in the dark. And then the bond gave her away completely, and she stopped caring who saw. There will be no taking this back, he murmured to her when it was done, and it was not a boast, and not a threat. It was a vow, and an apology, and a promise, all folded into the small, worn words. Not this time. I have a whole life to make you glad. You let me ask again, and I do not mean to waste an hour of it. I know, Aveline said. I made certain of it years ago. You may not remember, but I came back to this kingdom, the woman who owned your entire future. She looked up at him, and for the first time in 6 years, there was nothing cold in it at all. I have simply decided to keep it, all of it. You included, and a little way off, holding Tanson's hand and deeply unimpressed by the whole ceremony. A small boy with gray eyes waited for the boring part to be over, so that someone would finally take him to see the horses.